Have you ever just stopped and looked at, humanity's whole journey and thought, how did we even get here? Seriously, from being, well, seemingly just another ape to basically running the planet. And what if some of those big stories we tell ourselves about progress, civilization, what if they aren't quite the full picture? Today, we're diving into a really thought-provoking exploration. Our past, our present, and maybe even where we're headed. Our main source for this deep dive is Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. Came out in 2011. And it's way more than just a history book, isn't it? It's this amazing blend of history, anthropology, biology, even philosophy. So our mission here is to pull out the most important nuggets from this huge story. It goes all the way from Homo sapiens starting out in the Stone Age, right up to today. The digital age, biotech revolutions, all of it. We're really trying to tackle Harari's massive questions. Who are we? Where did we actually come from? What made us so different? And maybe the biggest one, where are we going next?
Exactly. And like you said, this isn't just reciting historical facts. Harari really makes you re-examine what it even means to be human. He challenges some really deep assumptions we all hold. So if you're someone who loves getting smart insights quickly, thoroughly, and you like those big aha moments that just shift how you see things, then yeah, you are absolutely in the right place for this deep dive. It's packed with them.
Okay, great. So let's unpack this. Harari's cornerstone idea, right, the cognitive revolution, he puts it around, 70,000 years ago. And his big claim is that Homo sapiens didn't dominate because we had better tools or we were physically stronger. Right. So what was it? What was this cognitive leap?
That's the absolute core of his argument. This leap, it let us communicate really complex stuff, abstract ideas. It allowed us to cooperate in way bigger groups than, any other species could manage. But here's the kicker, the truly revolutionary part. It gave us this unique ability to believe in things that don't physically exist. He calls them shared myths or fictions. Think about things like religions, nations, corporations, even money.
Money, right.
Yeah. And Harari has this fantastic quote, something like, "Fiction has enabled us not merely to imagine things, but to do so collectively." And that collective belief, even in stuff that isn't tangible, well, that unlocked cooperation on a scale nothing else could touch, far beyond any other animal.
Wow. So are you saying that even today, our entire legal systems, our economies, countries, they're essentially running on these ancient fictions we all just agree to believe in?
That's exactly what he's arguing.
That's genuinely mind-bending when you think about it. It's like the invisible software running human society.
Pretty much. It's the scaffolding, as you put it.
Okay, so now, here's where it gets really interesting, and maybe a bit controversial too. Harari takes the agricultural revolution, right? Around 12,000 years ago, usually we paint this picture of it as humanity's great leap forward, progress. But Harari, he calls it a fraud. That's a pretty strong word. Why does he say that?
It is strong, yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely provocative. His argument is that agriculture actually ended up, quote, domesticating humans more than we domesticated wheat.
Domesticating us? How so?
Well, think about it. Yes, it led to more food overall, absolutely. But for the average person, he argues it often meant worse health. Your diet became way less varied, mostly grains, and the work, much harder, more monotonous labor compared to foraging.
So instead of this clear path to a better life,
he sees it more like a trap that, ironically, might have increased individual suffering, even while populations grew.
Okay.
And this shift didn't just affect diet and work. It had huge social consequences, things we're still dealing with. It basically laid the groundwork for massive social inequality. For the first time, you really get the concept of private property on a grand scale. And he also links it to the rise of patriarchy. It wasn't just about food. It was a fundamental reshaping of how humans live together. Our whole social structure changed.
Right. So Harari is really pushing back against that standard narrative that more food and settling down automatically equals better. It really forces you to think critically, doesn't it, about the actual costs and benefits. It wasn't this simple, glorious march of progress.
Not at all, according to him. It was complex with serious downsides.
So, okay, we've got these revolutions changing life for individuals, small groups, maybe making it harder in some ways. But then how did we scale up? How did we go from scattered tribes to these huge unified societies we see later? Harari traces this gradual merging of cultures over millennia, the unification of humankind. What drove that process?
He points to a few really powerful mechanisms. First one, money.
Money again.
Yep, he calls it the most universal and efficient system of mutual trust ever created.
Yeah.
He has that funny line, you can never convince a monkey to give you a banana by promising him limitless bananas after death in monkey heaven.
Right.
But money works because everyone, regardless of their background or beliefs, collectively agrees to trust its value. It transcends those boundaries.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Then empires, these massive political entities, they unified huge areas, often violently, let's be clear. But they were also incredibly effective at spreading ideas, technologies, laws, languages, cultures across really diverse groups of people. They homogenized things in a way.
So force and administration playing a role.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And third, he talks about world religions. Think Christianity, Islam, Buddhism. These emerged as sort of early global moral systems. They gave vast numbers of people a shared narrative, common values, a sense of belonging that went way beyond their local tribe or city.
Binding people together on a massive scale.
Exactly, providing common ground.
It's actually incredible when you stop and think how these three things, money, empires, shared religions, all born from that collective belief, how they still form the bedrock of our complex global society today. Even with all our technology, these fundamental systems are still there.
They absolutely are. Still running on that same basic principle of shared fiction, you could argue.
So we've covered these huge shifts from our deep past. But what about the revolution that's arguably still happening? Harari brings us to the scientific revolution. Kicks off around 500 years ago, and it's still going strong. He says this is where humanity really figured out how to turn ignorance into, well, unprecedented power. How did that happen? What was the secret sauce there?
Right, and it's interesting how he frames it. He emphasizes that the key wasn't knowing all the answers. It was the willingness to admit ignorance, to say, I don't know. That, coupled with intense curiosity to find out, that's what drove scientific discovery. It wasn't about sticking to old dogmas. It was about questioning and experimenting.
Admitting ignorance as a starting point.
Precisely. And this is crucial. He talks about this powerful marriage, as he calls it, between science, empire, and capitalism.
Okay, tell me more about that marriage.
Well, these three forces basically fed off each other. Scientific breakthroughs gave empires new technologies, new advantages. Empires provided funding and opened up the world for scientific exploration and for capitalist ventures. And capitalism, with its focus on growth and investment, poured resources into both science and imperial expansion, expecting returns. It created this self-reinforcing loop.
A feedback cycle.
Exactly. A cycle that just accelerated everything, propelled human civilization forward at this incredible, sometimes kind of terrifying pace.
Yeah.
Capitalism itself emerges as this hugely powerful system, but, often a double-edged sword, shaping the modern world in profound ways, good and bad.
And it's really that combination, that specific historical mix, that gives us the roots of our world today, isn't it? The technology, the global connections.
Absolutely. It helps understand why the world looks the way it does now. It wasn't inevitable. It came out of these specific historical forces intertwining.
So Harari doesn't just stop with history. He uses it as a launch pad to look forward, which he does even more in his next book, Homo Deus. He really turns his attention to what might be next for us, for Sapiens. What does he see potentially coming down the line?
Yeah, he really ventures into some pretty speculative but also plausible territory there. He looks at the trajectory we're on, things like radical advances in genetic engineering, designing babies, the rise of artificial intelligence, AI potentially surpassing human intelligence, and even the audacious goal of overcoming aging and death, the pursuit of immortality.
Wow, heavy stuff.
It is. He introduces this really provocative concept of humans essentially trying to upgrade themselves into gods. Homo Deus, man-god.
Yeah.
Acquiring powers of creation like designing new life forms, and maybe even destruction on a scale never seen before. It's about fundamentally altering what our species is.
Not just improving life, but changing the definition of life itself.
Exactly. And that naturally throws up these massive ethical and philosophical questions, huge dilemmas. What happens when we can engineer inequality into our very biology? What are the implications of superintelligent AI? We're only just starting to grapple with these things.
It makes this whole discussion feel incredibly relevant, especially for anyone interested in tech, innovation, AI, biotech. These aren't just like sci-fi movie plots anymore, are they? They're real possibilities, even probabilities that we need to think about now.
Definitely. The future he outlines is rushing towards us pretty fast.
Putting the future aside for a moment and looking back at the book itself, Sapiens, what really struck me was the style. It's so readable, right? So accessible, yet it's dealing with these incredibly profound ideas. He weaves together history, science, economics, philosophy, just seamlessly.
It's a remarkable achievement in popular science writing, I think.
And it's so provocative. He doesn't shy away from questioning everything. Organized religion, capitalism, nationalism, even the basic morality of humans dominating the planet.
Exactly. And that's one of its greatest strengths. It really forces you to think, to reflect on society, on ethics, on the future. Think about his reinterpretation of the agricultural revolution, seeing it as a potential setback. That's bold.
Very bold.
And it offers this genuinely global perspective. It tries at least to step outside a purely Eurocentric view of history, which is really important. Plus, it keeps circling back to these fundamental human questions, doesn't it? Like, what actually makes us happy? Is all this progress we chase actually making life better?
It really makes you question your own assumptions.
Yeah. But of course, a book this ambitious, this sweeping, it's bound to have critics, and it does.
Right. What are some of the main criticisms?
Well, some academics argue he oversimplifies things, that he makes these huge generalizations about complex historical periods or processes, maybe jumps to conclusions a bit too fast sometimes.
Covering 70,000 years, I guess some simplification is inevitable.
Perhaps. But the critique is whether it goes too far in certain areas. Also, those later sections we talked about, moving towards Homo Deus, they shift from historical analysis more towards philosophical speculation, and that doesn't resonate with everyone. Some readers prefer the grounded history parts.
Okay.
And there's also a criticism that even though he aims for a global view, some of the underlying framing, especially around concepts like progress or certain ethical questions, might still reflect a kind of Western-centric bias.
Interesting. So how do we balance that? How should someone reading it engage with those potential weaknesses?
That's a great question. It raises the point about critical reading, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Even with a brilliant, influential book like this, it's important to maintain a balanced perspective. Recognize its strengths, the big picture thinking, the challenging ideas, but also be aware of where it might simplify or where the author's own perspective might shape the narrative. It's about engaging with the ideas, not just passively accepting them.
Which is really the goal of this deep dive too, right? To give you the tools to understand the core ideas and think critically about them.
Exactly. Fostering deeper understanding, not just information transfer.
So let's bring it back. Why does this deep dive into Sapiens really matter to you listening right now? I think it's genuinely one of those rare books that can actually change how you see the world. And maybe more importantly, how you see your own place in it. It makes you question the fundamental myths, the institutions, the fictions that shape our everyday lives. Things you might just take for granted.
Absolutely. And if I could connect it, especially for listeners who maybe appreciate systems thinking, logical frameworks, Harari's perspective is fascinating because he essentially treats human society as this complex system built on layers of interconnected abstractions.
Like software almost.
Kind of, yeah. Like software built on these layers of collective illusion, money, laws, nations, corporations, that core idea of shared fictions. You could almost see it as the conceptual kernel running the entire human operating system. It gives you this powerful framework for analyzing how our world functions.
That's a great analogy.
It helps make sense of how these intangible ideas drive so much of our very tangible reality.
So, yeah, it's incredibly relevant for anyone who wants to challenge the standard stories, understand how we actually got here, and just analyze the world around them more critically.
It's almost like required reading for understanding the 21st century human condition, I'd argue.
Agreed. Sapiens really is a book that dares to question, well, almost everything we thought we knew about being human. Harari's clarity, his ambition in tackling this immense journey, it's undeniable, and understanding his perspective feels essential if you want to grasp those fragile myths that hold us all together.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. A bit provocative, perhaps, building on Harari. If humanity's biggest achievements, our largest scale cooperation, have always been built on these shared fictions, then what new fictions, what new shared stories are we collectively starting to create right now? In this age of AI, genetic engineering, global networks, and how might these new narratives shape the next chapter of human history? Or maybe even redefine what being human means altogether?
That's a huge question to ponder. Really brings it all together. And if this deep dive has sparked your interest, we definitely recommend checking out Harari's other works for further exploration. There's Homo Deus, which, as we mentioned, dives much deeper into the future of humanity. There's also 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, which focuses more on current global challenges, political, technological, social.
And for sharing these big ideas, maybe with younger people, there's Unstoppable Us. It's a fantastic child-friendly adaptation of Sapiens. Really well done.
Great suggestions. Definitely lots more to explore there.